Well, it's Tuesday, October 8th, 2024, and I'm here with the cows. I got them all on the road here. There was just one hiccup. That calf right there left the calf area and joined us. I believe that's number 47. 46 or 47? 45? No, that's 46. She is too young to breed, and my goal is to get the bulls off either today or tomorrow, and then I'm going to bring the rest of the calves here and probably just keep the bulls together. I may choose a steer to keep and put him with the bulls, but I haven't really decided which one to keep yet. But I'm going to put all the cows back together again. The other hiccup was that this one, number 48, and her mom, and number 24 stayed behind. How you doing? Stayed behind at the back 20, and so I just left the row open and said, you can come over whenever you guys feel like it, which they did. Looks like they're having a good time here. There's beautiful number 10, half Brahmin. Excuse me. 24 is looking as good as she's ever looked. Still a little skinny, but you know, compared to last year, not nearly as bad. Still a little skinny though. I think this is 48's mom here. Yeah, number 20, young 20. So, and I saw that the other young heifer, she's like 18 months old or something like that. I saw that she was cycling, so her rear end is inflamed. And so hopefully the bulls will get to her and get her ready to breed next year. So, not to breed next year, but to birth. Give us a calf next year. Right now it's about 70 something degrees. Last night it got down to in the 50s, so it's getting pretty cold at night. But we're still looking at highs in the upper 80s to 90s. I'm surprised at how green the summer grass is and how well it's doing, particularly on the east end down there. I still haven't really identified that grass. It might just be a kind of ryegrass. But I'm pretty pleased with the vegetation I have in my pasture. And I think I might have bought too much hay, which is probably a good feeling to have. I want to be liberal with the hay this year. Feed the cows plenty of hay. And kind of continuing on yesterday's topic, I'm sorry, I'm in a riff now. If you're still watching, this will be good for you. If you've not unsubscribed or decided to stop listening to me rant on different topics, that's fine. This won't apply to you anyway. But one of the things that... So I grew up in an LDS home. My parents were very devout. My mother was more devout in the what you might call the, I don't want to be derogatory, but she kept the rules, basically. She was all about finding out what the rules are and keeping them to the best of her ability. And she read lots of books. She did lots of study, and she was very educated. When her kids left, she got a degree in psychology, a master's degree, I believe. I think she already had her bachelor's, or maybe she almost had her bachelor's, so she just finished up a couple more classes and then got her master's in psychology. Her goal was to become a marriage and family counselor. I think pretty much every good psychologist wants to be a marriage and family counselor, but those jobs are few and far between. And she ended up doing for labor and industries, people that get injured, helping them find good jobs that they can actually do with their injuries. There's kind of like a category of injured workers where it's like, yeah, you're injured, but there's jobs out there that you can do, and it's just a matter of matching the right job with your abilities. And so she was working one-on-one with workers that were injured and helping them explore possible opportunities and figuring out what they can actually do versus what they wanted to do or versus what they thought they could do. Oftentimes the workers think that they can lift heavy loads because they used to do it when they were young, But after a severe back injury or leg injury, it's like, no, you're not doing that anymore. So we'll find a job that doesn't involve lifting any weights or lifting very little weight. So anyway, that's how she ended her career. She got brain cancer at the young age of 65, and she passed away probably less than a year after she was diagnosed. I believe it was 2016 when she passed. I'm trying not to remember the year. I don't remember that too much. My dad, on the other hand, he was kind of a different animal. He was more of a scientist type. He was gifted with a brilliant mind since he was young. And one of the famous family stories is that when he was like 4 years old, he got outside when nobody's watching, hopped on the tractor, started the tractor, moved it about 5 or 10 feet, and then shut it down and got off and basically said, now I know how it works, right? And I think those were the old tractors. So that would have been in the 50s. It might have been one of those tractors you need a shotgun shell type thing to get it started. You need gunpowder to start it. I don't know. But he figured it out. He moved it and he went back home. And everybody was freaking out. They thought that he was going to get himself killed or worse. But, and then later on when Dad was older, like 8 or 10 years old, he took apart a tractor. He just took it all apart. And his dad's like, what are you doing? And he's like, I just want to figure out how it actually works. And when he was done and he was satisfied, he put it all back together in perfect working order, which is something I could never do. And I just wasn't gifted in that sense. I really don't like working with machines. My dad really didn't like animals. He thought horses were trying to injure him, and he thought cows were really stupid. And he found no passion in animals and farm life. He ended up becoming an engineer, doing electronics, and worked in the defense industry for quite a while. Myself, my dad also had the highest admiration for physicists and chemists, and he always wanted to be doing that, but he never really had an opportunity to. So when I went to college and I decided to get a physics degree, he was excited. He didn't really know what I was going to do with it. I didn't either. My mom was more like, you should get a practical degree so you can support a family. And rather than pursue a PhD, which I probably could have done. Sometimes when I say that, I feel like I'm the high school player that's like, yeah, I could have played college ball. I could have been professional. I don't know what would have happened when I, pit myself against the other PhD students and candidates. I'm fairly confident that I would have done at least average, Some of the comments from my professors made me think that I probably could have done quite well with it. But honestly, academia, that whole endeavor never really interested me. I liked building the machines. I liked thinking about the things, but I did not like leading a team or like doing the nuts and bolts of research, which is like the documentation and the, grant writing and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, I give you that as a background to kind of point out that I grew up in a fairly weird family. We had some very weird ideas that I didn't realize until I was much older, probably 30 years or older, that my family was quite special and unique, even within the circle of Latter-day Saints. So we had a fairly particular, unique approach to our understanding of the church and the doctrine and the gospel and stuff. And I found out that when I say something like, Joseph Smith was a prophet, Gordon B. Hinckley's a prophet, Russell M. Nelson's a prophet, that other people completely misunderstand what I'm saying, right? They have a completely different view on what those words mean, to the point where I'm of the opinion that if I were to sit down with you and say, what do you think a prophet is? And then you give me your definition, I'll say, no, Joseph Smith wasn't that. He was something else completely different, right? And I could probably sit down and go through the Bible and show you how your definition of a prophet doesn't fit any of them, right? That prophets in the Bible, apostles and prophets in the Bible were quite different than what we imagine them to be. And this kind of goes along with last video where I talked about the heresy of, or the bad idea that, the Bible is the inerrant word of God, and God basically dictated and the scribes wrote, and that's the Bible. Nothing could be further than the truth. further from the truth than that idea. So if you're the sort that you think the Bible is God, I just call on you to repent. Stop worshiping the Bible. The Bible is not God. The Bible is inspired words written by people who were inspired by God. Many of those people were in fact called by God to be a leader, a spiritual leader of the people at the time. And not just for their time, but for all time. But if you get into the mindset of early Christians, if you're able to jump back in time before the Bible was canonized, probably in the first century, I'd say first century, right? So let's say you're in the time period when Paul is starting to preach, and you've heard of Jesus, maybe you even met Jesus, right? Maybe you even knew Jesus, you listened to him talk, and maybe you even saw a few miracles that he performed, right? But at the time, if somebody were to come and say, hey, show me the Bible, you'd be like, what are you talking about? What do you mean by the Bible? And he's like, oh, the collection of all those inspired works. The first century Christian would say, well, I mean, like everything's inspired, right? In one way or the other. Even Plato and Aristotle, probably those early Christians would have said, yeah, they're inspired too. God inspired them to write, and they wrote. And while we probably don't accept everything they wrote, many things they wrote are true, right? And so we sometimes use the phrase small p prophet. There's a scripture in Revelation that says that prophecy is the testimony of Christ, right? So if you believe in Christ and you speak on that, you're a prophet. But when I was growing up, my parents inculcated in me the mindset that any knowledge that's true comes via inspiration and revelation. If even the simplest facts of nature or the most complex theories, if they're correct, or if they're even close to being correct, then the aspect of correctness that those theories possess come from God, right? And the people who deliver that knowledge to us are inspired of God. Whether or not they're worthy to be called prophets is a different matter. I distinctly remember I served my mission for 2 years in South Korea, and I come back to continue my physics degree, and I'm in a quantum mechanics class, and he's lecturing about like the wave-particle duality of nature, how waves are particles and particles are waves, and how nobody really understands it. And I distinctly remember getting a spiritual impression at that moment that what he was saying was true. And so when I say like Joseph Smith was a prophet, I'm also saying particles are waves and particles are waves and waves are particles. To me, those are the same kinds of truth, right? They're not different kinds of truth. I don't put one in one category and another in another category and say this category is more true than the other, right? And by that same token, when I'm watching videos of Greg Judy and different regenerational farmers, when they're talking about how the grass grows, I get a little inspiration there. They're like, yeah, this is true. This is what grass does. This is what animals do. And so I'm quite fervent in my advocacy of this style of farming. And the reason why I even, wasted my time and money and efforts to come out here, one of the reasons, there's other reasons, but one of the reasons is because I feel very profoundly that this is true in the same way that the Book of Mormon is true, right? And that probably confuses a lot of you right now. You've probably lived your life putting like religious things in one bucket and secular things in another bucket. And so to hear somebody who has a little bit of education, and maybe you might even consider me somewhat of an expert, I don't, but you might, to say things like, well, religious truth, spiritual truths, and secular truth, scientific truth is all one and the same. But that is one of the fundamental doctrines of our church. That's been with us from the beginning. Joseph Smith himself was a huge advocate of secular knowledge, right? When God inspired him to quote unquote translate the Bible, and I put that word in a quote because it doesn't mean what you think it means, right? When he started working on what we call the Joseph Smith translation and such, Joseph Smith got texts about the Bible from scholars who studied this, right? and he started studying Hebrew and Greek. And not only did he study with people who were very knowledgeable about the topic, but he would talk with other people who had spiritual knowledge and spiritual insights. And it was less of what you might think a prophet is, which is, Joseph Smith is out there working in the field or whatever, and all of a sudden, ding, God says, I want you to write this statement down. And Joseph writes it down, and he's like, I don't know what that statement means, but I wrote it down like you said. And it turns out that that's like revealed truth, right? That's not really what was happening with Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith was searching, he was studying, he was praying and analyzing and thinking, right? And I think one of the mysteries of the church that even members of our church, even Latter-day Saints, they misunderstand, having been a lowercase L leader, some of you might consider like it a high calling or something like that. I don't really consider it any more important than what you might consider a lowly calling in the church, or even not having a calling at all, just being a quote-unquote regular member. The process of revelation, the process of inspiration, when we met as a high council with the stake presidency, we 15 brethren, and we had to get revelation. The policy of the church was, you need to get revelation. You can't do anything until God tells you exactly what to do, right? And so how did we do that? What was the process? This is the same process you have to follow in your own life for yourself. And it's the same process that's followed at even the highest levels of our church. And so when the prophet, capital P prophet, President Nelson, when he comes down on rare occasions and announces something new that is earth-shattering and revelatory in nature, which really hasn't happened for some time. A good example would be section 138, which I believe it was Lorenzo Snow, where he had a vision of the afterlife, and he saw what Jesus did after he died before he was resurrected. And he witnessed in a dream where those things happened, right? And that process works something like this, right? Step one is you have a question that you need an answer to, right? And I would put like step 1 star, 1A, 1B, whatever you want to call it, that you are fully committed to getting an answer and executing faithfully upon the answer, right? So it's not just an academic question. It's a question that actually matters to you, that's important. Academic questions are interesting, and I love asking them and trying to find answers for them, but I tend to note that revelation doesn't really come for those kinds of questions. Occasionally it does, but not really. So that's kind of why it's an asterisk, that you're invested in getting an answer. Step 2 is the study part. That's the mind part. You need to engage all of your faculties and all of your ability in whatever regard that is. So you need to go start reading books. You need to go talk to experts. In our day and age, look at websites and YouTube videos. You need to study this the same way a scholar would study something, an academic would study something, okay? Gather all the best sources together, try to reconcile them with each other, try to figure out for yourself what's true and what's not, right? And then at some point you arrive at an answer. You're like, this is the answer. This is, I've done my homework. I've done all the study I possibly can on this topic, and now I have an answer. And you write that answer down, right? And this is the third step. The third step is you take it to God. And you prayerfully, religiously, spiritually seek an answer from God in the affirmative or the negative, right? What you're looking for is not God to speak and say, yes, that's true, or God to appear in a vision, which he sometimes does, okay? But that's not what we expect to happen 99% of the time. What we expect to happen is what we call the burning in the bosom. That references back the disciples on the road to Emmaus after Jesus died. They heard stories that Jesus was resurrected, but they didn't know what to make of it. And so they were traveling to a town called Emmaus, and they were talking with each other about it, trying to figure out what made sense and what didn't, right? When you have a woman and some devout people making crazy claims about somebody returning from the dead, it doesn't matter how faithful you are to whatever religion that was. Those are crazy claims, right? And every Christian should struggle with, was there a physical bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ? And if your answer is knee-jerk, yes, there was, then you're cheating yourself of an experience that you can have where you get a spiritual insight into whether that's true. Anyway, they were talking with each other, and as they were reasoning among themselves, they're kind of talking about the different prophecies that they knew about, the different stories that they've heard, and what they understood, and maybe some inspiration they've received in the past, maybe something Jesus said when he was still alive. And then suddenly there was another stranger walking with them who started explaining the scriptures to them, right? And they were kind of astounded, right, at what he was saying. And then as they turned into Emmaus, they told the stranger, they said, why don't you come in with us? We want to keep talking with you, but also you need to rest. And then he said, like, oh, I need to go on. And I think he revealed himself at that time. He said, you know, I'm Jesus resurrected. And they said, did not our hearts burn within us? Right? And I don't think they were talking about like the heartburn you get when you eat too much barbecued ribs, or, you know, like that discomfort. They're talking about that good feeling you get when you do something right, or when somebody says something that's true, right? And so that's kind of that's a spiritual confirmation, that is a spiritual confirmation that you should seek, right? And oftentimes that confirmation doesn't come immediately, maybe even not in a few years, but when it does come, then you can witness that not only do I know this with my heart because of the spiritual confirmation, but I know it with my mind because I studied it out and I looked and I questioned, right? And that's kind of the key there, is combining the two elements together is the source of true knowledge. You can't know anything by study alone, and you can't know anything by spiritual insight alone, right? They come together, right? And yes, sometimes God does reveal. Sometimes he does appear and he, announces a message and he says, write this down. It's super important. Go tell everybody what I said. Sometimes that does happen, but not often enough that you can use it to guide the daily decisions in your life, right? You need for yourself that constant inspiration, the constant study. You can't really make good decisions otherwise, right? It has to make sense in your heart and it has to make sense in your mind, right? And as a church, we follow that pattern as well. So there's lots and lots of examples of this, but where we study things out, and when we find that the conclusions of our study contradict what we thought was revealed knowledge, then we take it to God and say, hey, these two things don't agree. What's going on, right? And that's when revelation comes. Probably the last big revelation that happened in my lifetime was the 1978 revelation on the priesthood, right? Where the church leadership was confused because they grew up being told that Joseph Smith said blacks can't get the priesthood, and the teachings about the mark of Cain that came from the Protestant world that infiltrated our church. And they were confused because scholars discovered that Joseph Smith did no such thing. In fact, Joseph Smith even ordained black people to the Melchizedek priesthood, and they held offices and callings in the church that were quite significant. And then they go and they say, well, when did Brigham Young announce the ban? He never did, as far as we can tell by historical records, right? Maybe he did and they just forgot to write it down, which to us would be weird because everything Brigham Young said was written down, following the pattern from Joseph Smith. And so there was a lot of confusion. Furthermore, what added to the confusion was God told us to build a temple in Brazil. And so in order to prepare the people for the temple in Brazil, we were telling people, hey, do research on your ancestors. Go find your ancestors' names, so you can get them ready to do the work for them in the temple, the work for the dead. And some of these people were coming back and saying, I'm descended from a black African, which according to church policy disqualifies me from service in the priesthood at the time, right? And so the church was confused, right? How can we build a temple when these stake presidents and patriarchs and these leaders that have been members of the church for a very long time and held important callings and done a very valuable work in the church, who we're going to rely on to run the temple, how can we possibly do this? And that's when the revelation came in 1978 saying, if there ever was a ban, it's now lifted, that every worthy male can receive the priesthood, and there's no limitations. And that was revealed to Spencer Kimball, who was the president at the time, and he immediately took that revelation to the first presidency counselors, and they consented that yes, that was indeed revelation. President Hinckley, who was an apostle at the time, member of the Quorum of the 12, remembers when they met in the temple and President Kimball revealed to them what the Lord told him. And he remembers the spiritual impression that he received, that he knew at the time that he heard that it came from God. And so unanimously, the Quorum of the 12 adopted it as church policy. And then the 70, and then in General Conference a couple days later, they announced a new policy and, asked for a supporting vote. And because the church accepted that, it became the doctrine of the church, right? And now the church has accepted the revelation as true, and it's binding on the church. So we're bound by that revelation. That's the last major revelation received that way. But we have lowercase r revelations that happen all the time, especially administrative things like where do we build the next temple? How do we organize the missionaries? What should be the major messages we emphasize? And things like that. But so in my mind, growing up with my parents the way that I grew up, I never had any confusion about truth being categorized into one form or another. When I read Rene Descartes, and Rene Descartes says, I think, therefore I am, right? And the next thought he has is, therefore God exists, right? And we can receive knowledge from him, right? And so Rene Descartes, who's widely touted as the father of modern science, right up there with Francis Bacon and a couple other philosophers. I'm reading Francis Bacon. There's wonderful things that he said that we need to take to heart, that we've forgotten as a culture. And I love to talk about what he said. But, Rene Descartes, where he insists that the foundation of all knowledge is with God, right? And any pursuit of scientific knowledge, of understanding of nature, physics, math, has to start with the knowledge of God, right? And I insist that Rene Descartes was, at the very least, a small p prophet. And maybe, 1,000 years from now, somebody will be looking through all the books and come across Rene Descartes' writing and say, this is inspired. I'm going to put this in a collection of inspired works. And, maybe 2,000 years from now, some fundamental evangelical will be saying that Rene Descartes is one of the capital P prophets, and if you don't accept his word, then you don't accept God. You know what I mean? I don't know how that works, but that's kind of the feeling I get of what's going to happen with Rene Descartes. But go read Rene Descartes for yourself. Don't read about Rene Descartes. Go read Rene Descartes, right? And I recommend this for all the sources. Don't take people's word for it, because everybody filters what they're told. If I were to summarize Rene Descartes, I would give you my interpretation, which is not Rene Descartes' interpretation, right? So go read Rene Descartes. Go read Francis Bacon. Go read these early philosophers in modern science. See what they have to say. This video is entirely too long. All that to make a point. And the point is that the two knowledges, the spiritual knowledge and the physical knowledge, or the scientific knowledge, go hand in hand. They're one and the same. And we pursue both of these arts together at the same time, not one to the exclusion of the other. Guys, have a great day. Take care and bye-bye.